first thing I always say when I'm teaching on doors, which something I'm almost certain all of y'all know, and probably a bunch of y'all might raise your hand and say, that's exactly how I learned it. One of the first things that my dad taught me about doors, so you got to know what's a left hand and what's a right hand. So, and I still do this mental gymnastics in my mind where I try to figure out which way a door is handed. But these hinges, and I guess they may still be called brass butts or butt hinges. So what my dad taught me is, well, if you put your butt where the butts are going to be, this way it's a left hand, that way it's a right hand. So you may have some other way that you've learned it. Did anybody else learn it that way, or is it just me? Okay, good deal. I had no idea my dad was that far reaching in his teaching. Anyway, thank y'all so much. So like the first thing I do, I always personally want to have a shim behind the hinge, okay? And matter of fact, one of the things I've learned is, even though this might look like, if I put the level against it and it looks like it's perfectly straight, there's some little bump or something in there that I'm just not seeing. So I always want to get a little bit of a shim behind every hinge, no matter what. Barrett, where are our tapered shims? Oh, here they are. So in my years of installing doors, one of the things that I've found that is most likely to cause problems with the doors if it kind of tries to hinge behind, you know, you push, as you push the door closed, it kicks back at you. And, you know, there's still sometimes I struggle with that, but there's things that I do to try to minimize that as much as possible. And the first one that's most important to me is, you know, this is a tapered shim, thicker on one end. A lot of people will want to cross shim them, you know, like that. Think, you know, I'll keep it square. What I want to do is have the thick end. I want to have the thick end of my shim here. This is an exaggeration, but so if it's going to do anything, it's going to tilt the door like that. Now, unless I was to come up here, you know, and we've probably all seen it, you know, I know this would never happen with Kuiken Brothers lumber, but where I live, every now and then, especially back in the days when I used to trim apartment houses, you'd see one of these that was really already twisted a whole bunch. And if it was just extremely twisted already, I might actually shim it the other direction. So kind of the first thing you want to do, well, maybe I'll talk real quick too about, you know, am I installing this door on new construction where there's no flooring in yet? Or is this a remodel job where there's a finished floor? You know, those things you want to take into consideration. Most of my work over the years was either new homes or it was like add-ons, you know, where I was still going to have no finished floor. But if I did have a finished floor I needed to take into consideration, oh, here we go. One of the first things I'd want to do is, you know, put a level here to see if the floor is relatively level. And I'm the first one to say that, well, guess what? This side over here is low. So what I'm probably going to want to do is put a shim underneath this to hold it up a little bit. If this was going in over finished floor, what I would probably do, what I might do, is just go ahead and stick the door in there. And, you know, because that's lower, the door's going to be tight on that top corner. What I might do then is take a multi-tool and just cut as much off this jamb over here as I needed to let that header drop down, because a whole bunch of hanging the door is, you know, getting the right margins all the way around it. Way back, they used to say it was, you know, a nickel spacing across the top and a dime down the sides. But pretty much now, if you can get a nickel all the way around, that's pretty good. And that's kind of what I aim for. Another thing, okay, that door doesn't have it. This door is beveled on one edge. It's beveled on the latch side, this is an extreme example. This is the longest point. The reason that they do that, if you think about the geometry of it, as that door opens, that back edge has more of a chance to drag. So by beveling this, you kind of can help yourself not have that door drag. Sometimes doors actually have both edges beveled. And, it doesn't happen very often, but if I ever have a job where I'm actually mortising the hinges too, I'm not just installing a door. What I'm doing today isn't hanging a door, it's just installing a pre-hung door. But if you ever have an opportunity where you're actually mortising the hinges and everything, if you can get both edges beveled like that, now that's opening this, it's opening that hinge up a little bit automatically, and it can really help avoid that problem of it hinge binding. One of the things you want to check too, and this one is beautifully done, that they don't have any screw heads, right at an angle and sticking out, because sometimes that can just kill you. If they don't get the screws in flat, if they're in an angle. Of course, you always, I've been down this road before too, you always want to verify your opening, and we may be a little bit high here, but I guarantee with the trim we're going to use, it's going to clear. It's like about 82 1/4. So not too bad. The rough opening generally should always be 2 inches wider than the door. So we got about 34, and the rough opening is 2 inches wider, so you have about a 1/2 inch to shim with. Okay, so let me just go ahead and get started putting the shims in. And I did take, and I marked those hinge locations on the level if I'm hanging 10 or 15 or installing 10 or 15 doors in a day. Not having to take my tape measure out and measure each time is time saving. So I've marked roughly where those hinge locations are. Now I'm going to take, of course this is almost not fair because we did a pretty good job plumbing this up, and I was really blessed most of my career to work behind pretty good framers, except in the days when I was working on apartments. Those are a little bit rough. This, man, if anything, might need to come out a little bit at the top. So I'm going to take one of these shims. Remember, again, I've got a 1/2 inch overall to play with. So I'm probably going to put it in here about like right there. So I've got a good strong 1/8 to 3/16. Now, one of the other things though, this door is just in a wall. What if it's right in the middle of a hallway? Then you want to try your very, very best, to put more shim on whichever side it's going to take to get the door as close as possible to center it up in the hallway. I've done things, if one of the walls is out of plumb, I've taken and tapered the trim a little bit. I've cheated the reveal a little bit. When you're installing the door, we want to keep it as close to plumb as possible, actually hopefully perfectly plumb, but we also have to think about the conditions that are going on, around us. Like I think this, from what I remember, we couldn't, Barrett kept wanting to screw this wall down through the carpet to the floor, but we didn't do it. So we may have a little bit of movement here, hopefully we'll be able to get it done. So this is actually, man, it's out almost 1/4 inch on the hinge side. So ideally as a trim carpenter, I want that jamb centered in between the two sheetrock surfaces, right? Because that's where I get my best trim joints when it's close to flush. But on this, what I'm going to probably end up having to do is cheat the back, because if I hang this door perfectly, the jamb perfectly flush with sheetrock, I'm going to see it's laying out that way. I believe that means I'm going to get an automatically closing door. It'll either be automatically closing or automatically opening it when the door won't stand. And most people don't like that. So anyway, all right, I'm going to start. And I'm using a little staple gun. It's almost like a tar paper staple gun. I like to use this because it doesn't set the staples all the way through the shim when I've got a narrow shim. But you can also use drywall nails, work really well. Get another shim or two. Now, because these shims are tapered, this is exaggerated. I wouldn't want to put the level in there like that because that taper would mess me up. So I want to be relatively straight up and down. I'm going up here this top mark. And I'm just going to put it in there until, and I would also say, by the way, if you're installing almost any doors, well, make sure you get you a really good level and, a doorway level. So, I've got one of these for installing 6/8 doors, and then I've got a long level for installing 8/0 doors because, man, it seems like there's getting me more. Are y'all doing very many 8/0 doors? Well, we do a bunch of them where I live, and unfortunately sometimes people want the 3/0, 8/0 door to the master bedroom, solid core. I'm getting too old. I used to be able to carry one of those. Now I have to have somebody help. Anyway, all right. So as far as plumb, that's the last time I'm looking at the bubbles on that level, okay? Now, I'm just going to use it as a straight edge, okay? So I find where my other hinge location is, and I'm just sliding that in until it makes good contact. Again, on every one of these, the thick end of the shim's out here, so maybe I'm getting at least a little bit of taper. Now, having said this, I'm a big believer in using large enough barrel. We might ought to replace, even though this is a hollow core door, we're headed towards a solid core, we might ought to put a long screw in that top to keep it from pulling over. All right. So, sometimes I forget everything. We're just going to use some 2-inch 18 gauge nails to nail this in place. At home, I'd probably be using 2.5-inch 16 or 15 gauge nails just to make sure I get, but again, this is going to get swapped out or out of here pretty quick this evening. So, I'm going to flip this around. And I believe I said, Barrett, could you possibly get me a small shim? Because with this part being down low, need to raise it up. Give me a strong 8. There we go. That's probably good. All right. So, depending on how much time you want to spend messing with it, this jam is just barely, the head jam's sticking out that way a little bit. So if I can remember that long, when I get this installed before I start casing, I probably want to take the block plane and just barely kiss that, because again, the flatter the surfaces are that I'm installing trim on, the better off I am, right? Okay. So here's another little hint. This obviously isn't an 8/0 door. It's also not a hollow core door, but when I hang those really big old solid core tall doors, I'll make a big wooden wedge, okay? And instead of trying to fight this to hold it in place, I'll just put that wooden wedge in there and I can just keep tapping it and it holds the door up instead of me fighting it. Again, not a big deal on this, but if you're doing a 3/0, 8/0 solid core, that can be real helpful. So I am going to go ahead and I'm going to flush this with a sheetrock and put a couple nails in it. Now, I am pretty sure what I said was that this wall Yeah, so I need to try. Did you see how that closed on its own? That's what we're talking about we want to avoid. So I'm going to try and cheat this back. And I don't mind it not lining up with the face, the jam not lining up with the face of the sheetrock down there. I've got a big wide trim. I can take my multi-tool or whatever and get a bunch of that sheetrock out of the way. Plus I'm not making a mitered corner joint there, it's just a flat joint. I mean, it's not ideal, but if it's going to be out of line with the face of the sheetrock somewhere, down there is a whole lot better than up the top. All right. So I'm going to say I've got that. I've got at least 3/16 of an inch this way from the face of the sheetrock. So that's probably pretty close to plumb. And so what I'm normally doing is putting a nail on either the top and above and below the hinge and one on the back side. So now, I mean, it's about getting the right reveal. The next thing I want to do is get the right reveal across the top of the door. Well, I've actually got a little bit too much shim there. I probably could back this shim up a little bit and tap the door down. Or I could just shim it up over there. And again, if this was going on a finished floor, what I'd tend to do is try and put it right down flush and just take a multi-tool or something and trim this side to where I can get the right reveal, because you can probably get away with the door jamb being strong 16th, maybe an 1/8 off the finished floor, but you don't want any more than that. All right, let's see if I can maybe tap that down a little bit. Oh, you know what? I went the wrong way. I actually need to go up more. So this could be a chance though. What I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and put a screw in here, and I'm just going to take the multi-tool and trim that side off to where I get the right reveal across the top. I didn't plan it that way, but it'll be a good teaching thing. Okay, we got a star screw there. And normally on a hollow core 6/8 door, I wouldn't put this screw in, but we're actually going to swap this out for a solid core door here in a minute. So I'm going to want to get that in there. All I want to do when I run this screw in is just get it snug. I'm not trying to okay. Now I'm thinking I need to take, that looks like at least an 1/8, maybe 3/16 off the top. So what I may do is just use the thick end of one of these shims, kind of a guide. So for about the first 35 years of my career or so, this process would have involved a handsaw. I am super glad that we have the builder paper down here protecting the floors. I'm sitting there running a multi-tool right against, very close to the carpet. Okay, so I actually need to Hope no one minded me killing that spider. Bring it up just a tiny bit. Okay, that's about the, to me that looks like a pretty even reveal, and I'm also liking that I've got a decent amount of reveal there. So I'm going to go ahead and try and shim it. And this may take 2 shims up here. And up here I don't care whether I cross the shims or not. Again, I'm trying to, at least to start with, I'm trying to flush my jam with the face of the sheetrock. Whether we get to end up that way or not, I don't know. See, after I adjusted that, now the door's not wanting to close and open on its own, so we're in a lot better shape there. Okay, I'm going to need to double shim it down at the bottom. But once I get it roughly shimmed, the next thing I've got to do is I've got to make sure that it's actually hitting the door stop well. So I'm probably going to have to scissor it back a little bit. Oop, too much shim. Now the good news is I did not shoot a nail through the shims. That makes it a lot harder to adjust the shims. Okay, I'm liking that pretty well. So I'm going to go ahead and put another nail down here. But the problem I've got, and I figured I'd have the problem with that wall out of Plumb, is when I'm hitting the stop, I got a whole bunch sticking out here. So actually I can maybe bring that corner back out a little bit, and that'll help with the problem. I just kind of need to be careful where I'm, basically I'm going to try and tap on the back edge of the door jamb. You don't want to beat the door jamb up. That's probably about as much I want to cheat that. So this door stop, at least I'm pretty sure, has been applied. Yeah, has been applied afterwards. So kind of my last ditch. Okay, so that's way better. I'm still got just a little bit up there. So I'm just going to take. This is why my shoes were out. I'm just kicking that. Still got just a little bit. Take it back in a little bit more. Again, it looks like I'm going to be, okay, I can tell that it's hitting the stop all the way up and down. If I didn't have a wall back there, I'd probably get on the other side and look at it. But this door, when it's closing, is hitting really nice. I've got a good reveal up there. Sometimes you may want to look at this. This reveal is really good up and down, but I have seen times when this was pushed over, pushed there, and I had to put a shim up here to kind of adjust that, but we're in pretty good shape there. Still looking good over the top. So I'm going to shoot a couple nails there. And actually, after I moved it around a little bit, it's being kind of picky, but I feel like I could probably tighten this up a little bit at the bottom. Still could tighten it up a little more at the bottom. heard a story one time about, as a young carpenter, I always loved hearing all the stories about some guys. Back in the day, the Farmers Home Administration did a lot of loans, especially in Arkansas. And so if you were building a home, using that financing, they had an inspector that would come out and make sure that the house has been built to their specifications. And I don't know how, but somehow or another some guys pissed off the inspector. And so he literally came out, and that was the day when the specs were, a dime on this side and a nickel across the top. And he went through their whole house, and they had to redo the vast majority of the doors just because it's almost impossible to get that perfect. But I am feeling like I got pretty good margin here. So actually a tiny bit tight here. And once I get the casing trim on, that looks pretty good. I'm a little bit fat here, so if everything was just right, I probably wouldn't need to shim there, but since it's not giving me exactly the reveal I want, I'm going to go ahead and go find the exact high spot. So that looks pretty good all the way around now. Hitting the stop well. Okay. So that's looking pretty good. And this is, I kind of like this door because it is a smooth skin. It's not textured. Y'all still getting installed very many of those textured skin doors? I always ask, well, why would I want a simulated wood door that if you brought me a real wood door and it looked like that, I would reject it? So I like the fact that this is smooth skin. We certainly sell or install a whole bunch of those. Have you ever seen these those little hinge pin door deals? You can get that a lot of times, right? That wake everybody up out there? I was going to try and kick it, but I thought I don't want to really screw up all my shimming, so it's a much better idea to hit it right up there. So from what I understand, I'm from Arkansas, so I'm a little bit out of their market, but the Kuiken brothers sell a lot of these amazing, what's basically a solid door, to where I couldn't do that. Well, I could, but it wouldn't make a hole in it. So Barrett, if you'd help me, I wanted to do this before I got too much further along. And we could do it down here too. And it's a little harder there, but anyway. So I'm glad I hit it up where I did. Still, if you've been a carpenter very long, I gotta think you've been called out to fix, replace doors that had holes in them. So there's also a really big thing about how this door feels when it closes as opposed to that hollow core door. Certainly if that's what's in people's budgets, you just want to install it to where it's working as well as possible. But in my career, again, I sold my business about this time last year, but there were times when I literally got hired to be the contractor because people would check the way my doors closed and the way they felt, and they would say, "Oh, we want you to be our contractor." Remember one time we were doing a parade of homes thing, and I'm hoping this is the right width. We may have to do some more shimming. At any rate, we had people coming in to our parade of homes location, and they were just messing with the doors. And I said, "Well, what are y'all doing?" He said, "Oh, there's $1 million, oops, almost had it. There's $1 million house over there in that golf course community, and only about a third of the doors will actually close." So we just thought we'd come and see if your doors will close. Barrett, what am I? Had in there once. So close. There we go. Now we got it. There we go. Sometimes if I've got a really big door that I'm putting in like that, I will remove this hinge and just get the top and bottom. And that makes it a little easier. Okay, now that we've done that, okay, it's kind of interesting. I'm actually needing to bring the bottom back out a tiny bit this way. And it looks like I need a little more room on the top. That's not bad, but see, this reveal got a little bigger, so what I can do now, this gives me a chance to show that. I can put a shim here. It's pretty subtle, but now I need to back this up a little. Again, I did not put any nails through any of my. So there we go, we're back. We're in pretty good shape across the top. I think I can definitely live with it. So that's pretty good. I may real quick go ahead and shoot a nail into those shims now that I think I've got them where I want to go. And then we're going to talk about, I'm going to go through the process of trimming it. I didn't say anything about it, but you know, it's always important to shim right where the doorknob is going to be. Then it's not very good if the doorknob, someone goes in to install the doorknob and the screws pull the casing all the way out of place. We'll add a little bit more. You know what they say, the enemy of good is better. At some point you gotta go, that looks really good, I gotta stop messing with it. Now my goal as I start to thinking about trimming this door is I absolutely want to make sure that, because I want my trim to make good contact with this jamb. So my goal was to make sure there's nothing sticking out there, so as I'm cutting these shims, I'm cutting them back at an angle. And you can do this, you know, with the utility knife or about anything, but multi-tool sure makes it a lot easier. I should be cutting them back this direction instead of coming from the sheetrock side. That lets make sure they're not sticking out past the door jamb. Okay. All right. Now we're going to use a pretty large, pretty thick casing trim, which is a beautiful trim. I'll make sure I do not walk in front of the speakers. But so the thicker and the wider this trim is, and the thicker it gets, the more important it is to not have, to be able to make good contact, not have anything sticking out past the sheetrock. I'm going to start out because in my experience, and again, you just got to do what works for you. I can do better marking than measuring. So what I'll do, I know I've got a 6/8 door, so I'm just going to come up here to 8 foot, roughly. I'm also a big, and cut it in two. By the way, I absolutely love the clean lines. See how crisp those profiles are? Man, when that gets, the primer shows you some, when this gets painted, it'll be amazing. But what I'll do is put this in place and mark it. But like over here, I'm in pretty good shape with the sheetrock here. Over here, the sheetrock is sticking out a good bit. So to help overcome that problem, thank you, Barrett. A lot of times, I'm going to get rid of some of that sheetrock that's causing me problems. So I'll just sit this up here. The reason I do that, if this isn't too bad, like up there at the top, I'd probably just beat that up. But the further down I go, the worse it gets. And the fellow I'm going to tell the story on is actually no longer with us, but he was forever beating. He would beat the sheetrock up out about a 1/2 inch further than where the casing trim would cover. And he especially liked doing it over the top. But anyway, so I'm always trying to be very, very careful to make sure I know where something. Now I've got 3 inches of wood framing here, right? So I don't want to cut this sheetrock off back over 3.5 inches, but I've got that marked at about 2.5. So when it gets to be kind of extreme, I'll just get that sheetrock out of the way. I'm guessing Myron in the other room, when he heard the sound of me beating that sheetrock, probably kind of developed a twitch, would be my guess. Anyway. All right, so that's kind of got what was causing me some problems out of my way. At home, a lot of times I'll just have a little kind of a carpenter's bench. It's about that tall that I can just step up onto it. Because what I want to be able to do is get right up here. Now, remember me mentioning that this was just a tiny, tiny bit out. So what I'm going to do is take my block plane and just try and flush that up just a little bit. Because, if you imagine in the extreme that this was, whatever this is out, it's going to keep me from getting a flat joint, because a good joint on this casing trim isn't just one that's tight. The two pieces have to be lined up. the two pieces of miter joint to be lined up. If one's sticking out past the other, it'll really show up when it's painted. Okay. And I tend to, they say 1/4 inch reveal, but I tend to go more like about 3/16. And especially where what I'm doing helps is if I did have a finished floor down there. And we did do some jobs where where I live is a whole bunch of nail down and then finish in place hardwood floors. So those guys absolutely didn't want me to have the casing trim in place before they had to come do their thing. But we would case it after they installed it before they sanded it. All right. So it's really important for me to get a smooth cut. I'm going to pivot this piece around. And you'll see some people, because it's easier to see the long point, want to cut this trim back like that. But that's actually kind of tearing the wood fibers. If you go like this, you're shearing the wood fibers. Barrett, would you pass? I'm trying to make sure I don't go out in front of those speakers. This is a really good cut. We're using a Tenru blade. But even with this cut, if you run your finger this way, it feels real smooth. You go back that way, you can, like that, you can kind of feel it there. So just check that out. And sometimes I'll even cut it just a tiny bit long the first time and then move over and make my final cut so that I'm not removing a whole bunch of material. I am absolutely not a believer in thin curved blades, because especially the thicker the wood you get into, the more tendency there is that the blade could deflect. And on this joint, what's important on this joint is what you see right here, right? If that blade as I cut is deflected, it's kind of deflected that way. Now this part is sticking out more than this part. And what's my chances of getting a joint then? None. Without a lot of work. All right, I'm going to cut the other side, and then I take a block plane and relieve a whole bunch of my cuts under a little bit. Again, for me, what I'm trying to do is figure out a way to get the face to come together. So I appreciate all y'all out there hanging in. I will tell you that one of the things that we always do at the end of every session is we play Arkansas trivia, and we're going to give away some hats. Did Matt ever come back with the other hats, Barrett? Okay, well, the good news is the further we get into the day, the more hats we're going to have to give away, we think. All right, this one's lined up pretty good. This is going to go back to what I said earlier, that there's lots of different ways to do this. What I like to do is install both side pieces, get them really nailed up tight, and then fit the header piece. Some people like to install one side, then install the header, then the other. Yeah, I'm not going to argue with anybody about that, but for me, I'll show you the reason why I like to put both sides on, then fit the top. I can cut it a little bit long, put it in place, and see how those miters are going to line up, and then make minor adjustments to my cut. So for me, it's important to have a miter saw that I can, make really minor adjustments to it when I see what I've got to do. And this work light's really nice too. So I'm going to take just a tiny bit off. This might be a really good time to talk about too, whatever you do, I'm only going to get the cut I want when this molding is down tight against my saw and is back against the fence. if I'm trying to do this down on the ground, without any support or whatever, I'm just not going to get a good cut. So I'd really encourage you to get some sort of a saw stand where you can work standing up. When you get to be my age, you'll really, really appreciate that. But also where you can see clearly what you're doing and make sure you got the wood down tight, okay? What? Oh, Matt does? Sure, bring them on up here, Matt. Barrett helps me all the time, but I've also got to say a huge thank you to Matt who came and helped us. We would absolutely not have had this all set up where we're at, without his help. And I said, as best I can tell, and Barrett could testify this, I'm not quite as fast as I used to be. And probably nowhere near as fast as I remember myself being. All right, so I'm not going to take it all off, but I'm under beveling this a little bit. This is a low angle block plane. It's not quite as sharp as it was when it came out of the box, but it's still pretty good. And I will tell you, some people say, well, why don't you just set the saw on a bevel a little bit or something? Trust me, you do not get, once you set that on a bevel, you do not get the same cut. So you want to cut everything as if it was laying perfectly flat and then bevel it under. And I don't have to bevel it the whole way, but anything I can do here is going to help me get a better fit. And if I was as good at sharpening a block plane as some of the friends I have, this would be even better. All right. I'm going to go ahead on this one, and I'm just going to put some pencil marks, which I don't know whether you'll be able to see them or not, across this end, and maybe you'll be able to tell a little bit about how I'm beveling it by how much pencil marks left. Again, on the thicker the trim, the more this beveling is going to help you. I may even go ahead and set this a little bit more aggressively. I don't know if this is a low angle block plane. And the other part of it too is, these planes you're probably going to spend over $100 for, but it's kind of like buying a saw blade, The cheap saw blade's not going to do for you what you want to. So roughly, I've kind of block planed it along a line about like that. I don't know if you see it or not. So I'm trying absolutely not to touch the face. And by the way, another thing, at least in the world according to me, I've had people say, well, can't you take a piece of sandpaper and sand that? No matter what you do with a piece of sandpaper, it's going to round it over more than, so you want to do something that's cutting it. All right. Let's see how we do here. Barrett, I guess I'll just try and blast all these on with a 18, hope I don't shoot nails out. Do we have a 20? We have an Air 21. Let's have that 20. So I've started more using the 21 gauge, which has a little bit more holding power than a 23, and a 21 has a tiny, tiny bit of a head. So you do end up with a little bit, what? No, inch and a half, inch and a quarter would be okay. You do end up with a tiny bit bigger hole to repair than you would with the 23, but you get a little bit more holding power. So it's kind of a compromise. Barrett, would you get a clip of 21s and just pass it out, please? So I'm getting really good contact with the door jamb, which is what I want. I'm nailing, and I nail about every 6 inches or so. Uh-oh, that one I got to talking instead of paying attention to what I was doing and ran outside. You know, the painters may not be in love with that, but I wanted everything pulled up really good and tight. So, hopefully, well, one of the things I have learned to do, if at all possible, anytime I run a nail out, I want to wiggle it around to try to break it off instead of clipping it. Because if you clip it, you end up with something really nasty sticking out that can tear somebody up. Of course, this one's, I think I got that. We'll check it later. All right, let me get the other side. So I'm nailing the inside edge first and nailing it up as tight as I possibly can. Then I'm going to come back and nail the other edge. And of course, when you're on this wide a trim, what you have to remember, when you're nailing towards the outside edge is, you've only got 3 inches there, so it doesn't do a whole lot of good to get out there and nail. See, this is trying to tilt a little bit. Even though I removed the sheetrock way back here, this is still trying to tilt a little bit. So I'm going to put maybe even a few extra nails in this inside edge. And hopefully I won't repeat running it out. Well, I like this trim because it's got a bead, a great bead that I can put a nail right on top of that bead. Painters tend not to like it if you put a nail hole back in some kind of little crevice they can't get their finger in to putty. Now, again, I'd normally be using a little bit bigger nail. These are 2-inch 18 gauge. I'm going to nail them right in there. Can y'all see that? That's what I'm, oh boy. That's probably going to be the more challenging part of my demonstration to work that out. So here we go. Barrett, would you drag that other piece of casing trim up there, please, sir? All right, so when I measure this, I want to cut this piece at least 1/8 inch long. So I'm going to go for about 41 11/16. Yeah, I'll just cut it somewhere around in here. It'll be good. Okay, now it's important to have the same amount sticking out each side when I'm kind of judging what these, okay, that really is, I wouldn't have thought that one would fit better than the one over here. We got maybe a little bit back like that. I'm actually not too far off. It feels like it's dragging a little bit on this inside edge, but I'm going to just take 1/16 of it off like it is, and then put it back up there and look at it again. When I do adjust the cut, what I want to do is lower the blade down, and I'll push the board over, and I can see the cut I'm going to get. So I may go and take a tiny bit off the inside. So I'm just barely going to bump that over a bit and lock it down. So now when I look at that, it's probably too much, but I'm taking almost a 1/16 off this inside corner. I'm trying to get, this saw is pretty good about not having to have the detent overridden to make those adjustments. So again, I moved it over. Now, another kind of personal crusade I have, some people teach you, every time you hit a detent, you need to lock it down. This isn't going anywhere, okay? So when you hit that detent, just stop. You don't need to lock it down. It's not going anywhere. But one advantage can be if there's a couple people working with the saw, and if no one's locking it down unless it's off a true 45, you walk up to it and the detent's locked, and I better not mess with this until I find out, somebody still needs that cut. All right. Okay, I've got that. Yeah, so it looks like my adjustment that I made there I probably didn't need to make, but I still want to kind of talk about how I do it. So I'm going to go back on the detent and trim a little more. I don't mind making 2 or 3 or 4 trips back and forth, cutting a little bit off, because getting that joint right is really important to me. It is a good idea to try to, if at all possible, and some of y'all that do remodeling, this may make you mad, but I really like to have the saw as close as possible where I'm working. I have had jobs that say, you can only cut in the garage or whatever. And it's like, well, okay, it's going to take more. That'd probably be a good thing to find out if you're bidding a job in remodeling, whether they're going to let you cut, where you need to be able to cut right close to your work, or if you're going to have to go downstairs and out into the garage every time you make a cut. Man, this is really close. So I need to just barely kiss it. And of course, if you want to take just a little bit off, most of y'all know this, so forgive me if you don't. Those carbide teeth stick a little bit out past the plate of the blade, right? So if I lower it down, and I'm not trying to bend the blade, but if I push this over solid against that, I just took about a 30-second off. Basically, I took off however much that carbide is out past the plate. It's probably not actually quite enough for this, but we may get close because we're about to run out of time. It's going to be pretty good. I'm going to tell you what. So I'm also a big believer in, I'm not going to do it on this one, but especially on prime stuff, I would go ahead and glue those miters. It's going to help you. It may not be perfect, but it's going to always help you to glue those miters together. But I'm going to go ahead and nail this in place now, and then it will be time for Arkansas trivia. You ready, Barrett? We have about 5 of one type of hat and 5 of another. Explain to them the rules about Arkansas trivia while I'm doing this. Why do we do Arkansas trivia?
Because our master carpenter is from Arkansas.
Thank you, Barrett. Oh, no, if we're going to give out 10 hats, we want 10 different people to walk out of here happy. I am going to go ahead and push this back and shoot down. As thick as this trim is, I actually could probably shoot down through there with like an 18 gauge. I may try it. All right. Okay. All right. Now, the great news is, I mean, to me, I love looking at that. Love to see those shadow lines, the definition, that molding. I think it looks fantastic. But we are going to do even more with that door in our next session. We will not be beating a hole in this door, though, if you came to see that. We're not going to be beating another hole. So I can't tell y'all how much we've enjoyed doing this, how much it means to us to see y'all out there. So I'm really hoping, we actually start off slow. We're going to start building, doing better and better stuff all the time. Thank you, Barry. I couldn't do that. Thank y'all so much. I hope to see you back here in an hour.